Have you ever wondered about how milk is handled before we consumers get our hands on it? Greetings! My name is Stephanie Clark, and I am a professor at Iowa State University in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition, and I specialize in dairy food science. In today's talk, I will teach you some of the basics about milk chemistry and microbiology and bust some myths that you may have heard about dairy farming and products. I will teach you about milk processing steps and will help you gain insight into some of the regulatory practices that are in place in the dairy food industry. Finally, I will teach you about one way that you as a consumer can track where your milk and other dairy products come from. Let's begin by talking about milk composition and nutrition. Being a fluid, milk is nearly 90% water. The primary solid in milk is the sugar lactose. Directly from the cow, milk only contains about 3.5% fat and about 3.3% protein. The final solid is vitamins and minerals, otherwise known as ash. For comparison, goat milk contains a little less water and more fat and protein, and sheep milk contains even less water and even more fat, protein, and lactose. The vitamins, minerals, or ash content is very similar across all species. In addition to being the primary solid component in milk, lactose is essentially the sole carbohydrate or sugar in milk. It is a disaccharide composed of glucose and galactose. That disaccharide is cleaved or broken apart by the enzyme called lactase or beta-galactosidase. Fermentation of that lactose leads to some flavorful end products in fermented foods like cheese and yogurt and other things. But maldigestion, often called lactose intolerance, it leads to discomfort in the gastrointestinal system. I think it's important for people to understand that lactose intolerance comes in many forms, and that's the extreme form. Maldigestion is just simple discomfort when consuming dairy products, and dairy products really shouldn't be completely removed from the diet because they're so nutritionally rich. There is a myth out there that whole milk is full of fat. Let's talk more about why that is a myth. Many people do not realize that whole milk contains only about 3.25% fat. That is the legal minimum amount, but most companies stay close to that number because the fat is valuable and is put into other products like cream, butter, and ice cream. For a product to be high in any nutrient, the nutrient must contribute 20% of the daily value per serving. Whole milk contributes 10% of the daily value. The reduced fat products contain even less. The primary form of fat in milk is triacylglycerols, or triglycerides, mostly saturated, but also monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. Fat is an important nutrient in our diet, particularly for energy and absorption of fat-soluble nutrients. Although hydrogenated trans fats should be limited in our diet, dairy products contain trans fat that is natural, and that is called conjugated linoleic acid, and it's actually anti-carcinogenic. So we don't need to avoid the natural dairy trans fat. At 16% of the daily value of protein per cup or serving, milk is a good source of protein. About 60% of the amino acids in milk are essential, which means we need them from our diet. We can't make them in our own bodies. Sometimes protein yields an allergic response. That might come in the form of itching, hives, inflammation, or even some gastrointestinal disturbance. And that's specific to cow milk protein. And sometimes people do okay with goat or sheep milk products because the protein amino acid structure is different. So goat and sheep products might be okay for people with cow milk allergies, so they don't have to totally give up dairy. Casein is the primary component of cheese, and the whey proteins make up the whey along with water, lactose, some of the fat, and some of the vitamins and minerals. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Let's look a little closer at those milk proteins. I mentioned the caseins and the whey proteins. The caseins are 80% of that protein, and the whey proteins are 20%. The caseins are sensitive to acid, which means we can coagulate them with acid, but they're stable to heat. The opposite is true for the whey proteins. They're actually sensitive to heat, and we can coagulate them with heat, but they're stable to acid. The caseins are alpha S1, alpha S2, beta, and kappa casein. And the differentiation is that kappa casein is stable to calcium, so you can't coagulate it in the presence of calcium, whereas if you stick a bunch of free calcium into the milk, usually in the form of calcium chloride, we could actually destabilize or coagulate the milk with that. The whey proteins are beta-lactoglobulin and alpha-lactalbumin, and they are the primary proteins that go into the whey, but also some of that kappa casein gets trapped in the whey or is floating around in the whey when we make cheese. Milk is a good to excellent source of 9 essential nutrients. I already mentioned that protein is one of the essential nutrients. But along with that, we have 30% of our daily value in every glass of milk for calcium, 20% for phosphorus, 11% for potassium, 10% for niacin, 10% for vitamin A, 25% for vitamin D, 13% for vitamin B12, and 24% of our daily value we get from consuming a glass of milk for riboflavin. So it's a really nutrient-dense beverage. Because milk is so nutrient-dense for us, it's actually quite nutrient-dense for bacteria too, which is why we have to take milk microbiology and safety very seriously. Have you ever heard it said that raw milk is inherently safe to drink? In the next few slides, hopefully you'll better understand that there are risks associated with drinking raw milk. In addition to being nutritious to bacteria, it's also sourced from animals that do not live in a completely sanitary environment. Additionally, milk is full of water, right? 88% water, and has a near neutral pH. Thus, it's a perfect environment for bacteria, good and bad, to grow. The bad news is that it only takes a few of the bad bacteria to make us sick, whereas it takes a lot in the millions for us to benefit from beneficial bacteria. Many of the bacteria that are dangerous to humans only take about 10 to 100 cells per milliliter to make us sick. Thus, it is essential that dairy farmers and milk processing facilities have prevention, inhibition, and destruction measures in place. We will talk about a few of them today. Milk regulations help prevent, inhibit, and destroy microorganisms that can cause disease. Because milk is widely consumed by young, old, and immunocompromised, milk is one of the most highly regulated food commodities. Prior to the use of pasteurization, diseases were commonly associated with raw milk. Even today, raw milk may contain dangerous bacteria, but milk production and distribution is regulated at the state and federal levels. The National Conference on Interstate Milk Shipments, Food and Drug Administration, and state departments of agriculture all play a role in ensuring milk's safety. As a result, fewer than 4% of all food and waterborne outbreaks are due to dairy products today. Some of the things done to ensure safety include dairy farm, dairy plant inspections, and milk testing, and highly trained licensed personnel. Dairy farm inspections alone include the facility construction, water testing, general sanitation and cleanliness observation, cleaning and sanitizing of all milk contact surfaces, animal drug usage and storage oversight, and sampling of milk. When milk gets to the plant, where it may be processed into a variety of different products, it has to undergo a bunch of testing even before it can be removed from the truck. The first is temperature. Next is antibiotics. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about antibiotics because many people don't realize how much effort is put into ensuring that no dangerous drug residues or antibiotics are in milk. When a milk truck driver arrives at a dairy farm, he or she takes a sample from the tank and places it on ice. That serves as a representation of the tank of milk at that farm. The truck driver may pick up 2 or 3 more farms, so every farm has its own representative antibiotics sample or milk sample that may contain antibiotics. When the truck arrives at the plant, the truckload of milk must be tested at the plant before the milk is delivered. So that means that a sample is taken off the truck, which may contain 2, 3, 4, 5 different farms. So it's tested for antibiotics right there. If the truck is found to contain antibiotics, it must be dumped. So that's where those individual milk samples from the different farms comes in. The source of antibiotics is then determined, and the farmer found responsible pays for the entire load of milk, thousands of dollars. So no farmer wants to have antibiotics in their milk. So they're always testing their animals to make sure that if an animal is treated with antibiotics, the antibiotics have moved out of the animal before that animal is returned to the milk supply. Milk samples testing positive for drug residues in 2018 only found 0.014%, or 584 out of over 4 million samples tested. None of that milk made it into the milk supply because any tank found positive must be dumped. And again, I repeat, dumped at the expense of the farmer found to be responsible. After milk is processed, the milk is also checked again. Not only is raw milk tested for composition, somatic cells, bacteria, temperature, and antibiotics, but even afterwards, the milk is tested again to ensure bacterial safety and quality. So milk undergoes a lot of testing. So now you know this statement is a myth busted. Next, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the processing steps milk goes through before packaging and distribution to stores near you. This figure shows the basic overview of milk processing steps. Earlier, I mentioned the importance of prevention, inhibition, and destruction of bacteria to ensure milk safety and quality. I want to point out that there is actually only one step where destruction of microorganisms takes place, and that is at the pasteurization step. Everywhere else, we rely on prevention and inhibition. This underlines the importance of sanitation throughout the chain. Because bacteria grow best when warm, milk refrigeration is essential for milk quality and safety. This control has to happen at the farm, by the truck driver, and at the processing plant. Additionally, sanitation is key to control of microorganisms, and it is only effective with proper protocols and chemicals. The first step that milk undergoes when it enters the plant is clarification and separation. Clarification removes any solid impurities like cow hair that might have gotten in or somatic cells, and separation is essentially separating skim milk from cream. It happens with centrifugal separators. Standardization is the next step. That's where the fat content is controlled in line to give you your skim milk, your 1% low-fat milk, your 2% reduced fat milk, your 3.25% whole milk, and any cream products that you have. Let's jump in here with another myth about milk. Organic milk is hormone-free. Well, that's absolutely not true, because all living things naturally have hormones. And when we remove the milk from the cow, that means it naturally has hormones, regardless of whether it's certified organic or not. When milk is separated into skim and cream, the fat-soluble vitamins A and D stay with the cream. Thus, for reduced fat milk products like skim, 1% and 2% milk, for them to be nutritionally equivalent to whole milk, vitamins A and D must be added back. Although whole milk naturally contains vitamin D, and it's a good source, some processors add more or fortify milk because it's a good delivery vehicle for this nutrient that is deficient in many people's diets. Vitamins A and D are the only ingredients added to white milk. Anything else would be considered adulteration, which is illegal. Pasteurization is the one step in the milk processing line where destruction of microorganisms occurs. It is legally mandated for fluid milk sold across state lines. However, every state can decide whether raw milk can be sold within the state. For instance, Missouri, Minnesota, and Kansas allow the sale of raw milk from farms in those states, but Iowa does not allow the sale of raw milk in any form. Pasteurization is a time-temperature combination that reduces the number of viable microorganisms to the point that they are unable to make people sick. It destroys yeast, mold, pathogens, and some spoilage microorganisms. It's not boiling or sterilization, so some spoilage microorganisms can survive. That is why milk still has to be refrigerated. If you see milk in the store with a cream layer like this, it means it's non-homogenized. Milk is most commonly homogenized today to reduce the size of large milk fat globules, to stabilize milk fat against gravity separation, and to ensure that every customer receives the same consistency of milk throughout the entire package. The figure here is meant to show how, in raw milk, the milk fat globules range in size up to about 8 micrometers. With 100 bar of homogenization, we can reduce the range so milk fat in the 1.5 micrometer size predominates. With even more pressure, here 250 bars, milk fat globule size of less than 1 micron predominates, so we don't have cream layer at the top. Perhaps you or one of your friends has experienced discomfort after consuming dairy products, and you've been told to give up dairy products. Well, that's very unfortunate because there are a number of dairy products that can be consumed if you are lactose intolerant. This is one that's become very popular, and also there's always cheese. Almost any kind of cheese can be consumed if you're lactose intolerant because the bacteria in the cheese have converted the lactose into lactic acid and other flavorful byproducts that don't hurt you. So there's no reason to give up dairy products. Let's start to get into some of the products and how they're made. Lactose-free milk is really regular milk with one ingredient added, and that is the enzyme lactase. The A's means it's an enzyme and it breaks lactose. So that enzyme is added to the milk, it breaks that lactose into the monosaccharides, glucose, and galactose. Thus, it ends up tasting sweeter than regular milk. So no sugar's been added, it's just that the natural sugar lactose has been modified into its basic parts. Perhaps you've heard of the product called buttermilk or cultured buttermilk. Well, buttermilk is the byproduct of butter making. If we take cream and we shake it a lot, or we put it into a blender and really agitate it, we can separate the cream into butter granules and buttermilk. So that liquid portion is pretty much fat-free, and that's buttermilk. But now that buttermilk is going in and being dried and going into the baking industry. Now, let's talk about cultured buttermilk. If we were to make sour cream and then do the whipping process, we would have cultured butter and cultured buttermilk. The same situation, if we make that with cream and make sour cream and have the two products, that's often going into the bakery industry. So now what we do, what Anderson Erickson does is they take reduced fat milk, low fat milk, or skim milk even. So they're really typically making it from a very low fat milk, And then they're adding lactic acid bacteria to make cultured buttermilk. So they pasteurize the milk, the reduced fat or low fat milk. Then they leave it warm and add, let's say, 1% proportion of lactic acid bacteria. And they let those bacteria ferment the lactose into lactic acid. And that's how we get that sour, creamy feeling product. And it doesn't have much fat. And that's a nice product for buttermilk pancakes and things like that. So you can make that at home. You can drink it straight or you can make products with it. So that's cultured buttermilk, and it has no lactose. So that's good for folks who have issues with lactose. The third lactose-free product, well, not exactly lactose-free, but product that consumers with lactose issues can consume is this low-fat milk made with probiotics. It's called Healthy All Over Low-Fat Milk Made with Probiotics, and it was formerly called Sweet Acidophilus Milk. Let's go to the next slide. Sweet acidophilus milk, or the low-fat milk with probiotic bacteria, is made in a similar way as the cultured buttermilk, with one major difference. We start with pasteurized, homogenized, reduced fat or low-fat milk. Then we add our lactic acid bacterial cultures when it's cold. So with the cultured buttermilk, we did our pasteurization, then we reduce the temperature to a temperature that the bacteria like to grow at. So they grow, multiply, and consume the lactose and convert it into lactic acid. But with the sweet acidophilus milk, they don't get a chance to do that conversion. They're not able to ferment that lactose. So there's still lactose in this milk, but we have the bacteria in there. When we drink that milk, we can actually consume the milk comfortably because the bacteria will do the work for us if we are lacking the enzyme ourselves. And it ends up tasting just like regular milk because they haven't fermented that lactose into lactic acid. So that is the major difference there between the sweet acidophilus milk and the cultured buttermilk. But both should be good for people who have issues with lactose maldigestion. The fourth and final product that I want to talk about, which is suitable for people who want to drink milk but have issues with lactose, is called Fairlife Ultra-Filtered Milk. Similar to many of the other products we've talked about, separation is an early step in the process where we separate the fat from the skim portion of the milk, and then we can standardize our milk to the different fat levels. But where this differs from all other milks is this step called ultrafiltration. And that's why this product has to be called Fairlife Ultrafiltered Milk. It can't be called Fairlife Milk because we've actually changed the product so it no longer meets the regulated definition for milk. Ultrafiltration involves forcing the milk through very small pores. They're big enough, though, for the sugar to get through, but the protein stays back. So the minerals that are bound in the protein, so calcium phosphate, which is bound to the casein, that gets held back with the protein, which is why Fairlife Ultrafiltered Milk has less sugar, but more protein and calcium. It actually has more phosphorus too. But even though we reduce the sugar, there's still lactose unless we add the enzyme lactase. That converts the lactose into the glucose and galactose. But it doesn't taste as sweet as lactose-free milk because we already reduced the sugar. So even though there's glucose and galactose in there, it's balanced just right. So the milk doesn't taste as sweet as when we make that lactose-free milk, where we haven't actually removed any sugar. Ultra-pasteurization is another step that distinguishes it from many other products in the store. Most of the fluid milk is simply pasteurized, which kills the pathogens and a good amount of the spoilage microorganisms. But ultra-pasteurization kills even more of the spoilage microorganisms, so it has an even longer shelf life. Then finally is the homogenization step, which is extremely common in the industry. Those are the basic steps, or more complicated steps, I guess you could say, of Fairlife ultra-filtered milk production. Now we are going to move into a little bit about traceability of fluid milk. The code you see highlighted here tells us a lot of information. Let's look closer. I want to start with the guidelines used to establish the pillars of the U.S. dairy traceability system. The first is to model physical plants to know where new lots enter and where products transform or are processed into new products. The second is to create a lot identifying mark that will be recognized and used by consumers. That is the example shown on the previous slide that I pointed out to you. The third is to utilize enhanced record keeping that will assist in expedient and effective recall capability. Now today I do not have time to go into details of all of those things, but I urge you, if you are interested, to take a look at the 21-point Enhanced Dairy Traceability Checklist at the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy website. How often do you look at the codes on milk? If you are like many consumers I've surveyed, perhaps you always look at the code date. But have you ever wondered about those other notations on the container? Today I'm going to tell you what they mean and how they can be used in tracing milk. On the surface, these look like two very different containers of milk. They have different fat content, 2% in skim, and different company labels. But look closer. The timestamp tells you that the skim milk was produced at 11:35 at night and the 2% milk was produced at 12:11 a.m. at the same federally identified plant number 19053. I want to tell you more about how you can find out where both of those milks are pasteurized. And if you go to the store, you can discover many other products produced there as well. Federal Dairy Plant Identification Numbers, or the Interstate Milk Shippers List, can be found at this site. Let's go a little deeper into this 226-page document. Here, we have every state alphabetized, along with its federal code. So you can go down the list to find your home state, for instance, mine is Massachusetts, or where you currently live, or in our case, we can go back to our example milk. Here is that example milk, and it says 19053. So look at the two digits at the beginning, 19, and that's what tells us where the milk was processed, at least the state. And so we look down the list and we find that the state is Iowa. The next step in the process is to find the specific plant number. To do that, we go to the Interstate Milk Shippers List. It can be found on the original page I took you to, but at this specific link. Let's take a closer look. With this, we can look at each state individually and every plant, along with what products they make. So in this case, we are looking at Illinois, State Code 17, and I have picked Prairie Farms Dairy Incorporated. They have several plants. If we look at their Peoria plant specifically, we can find their number and what dairy products they make. The codes are associated with raw milk intended for pasteurization, pasteurized milk, heat-treated milk, milk intended for further processing, pasteurized cream products, and cultured or acidified products like buttermilk. Now let's go back Now let's try another. If you go to your local grocery store, you will likely find a variety of dairy products. Although most of the fluid milk products are produced within 100 miles of where you live, Fairlife fluid milk may be an exception. Other dairy products like sour cream and cottage cheese and ice cream and butter may also be made further away than 100 miles. Let's find out where this Fairlife milk is made, and then you can look for the sour cream later. All right, so based on our list from earlier, we first have to find out the state code for this product. So that is the 26. It turns out that 26 is Michigan. So next, we look down the list and we find the 207, and that 207 is the Fairlife plant in Coopersville, Michigan. So that's relatively easy. Now, I'm going to leave this last one up to you. This is an Aldi product. Maybe some of you have gone to Aldi and found Friendly Farms products. You can find out where all of those are made by looking at the codes and looking them up. So try this one on your own. Everything that you need should be in this slide deck, so you can go back through and figure out where this and other dairy products are made. I hope you've learned a lot about dairy products today, a few new things. If you have any further questions that you want to ask me, feel free to reach out at my email address below. Thank you for your attention. Bye.